And here we go. So this is about the pre-Columbian Americas, North America, South America. This is Unit 7. This is Part 1. Pre-Columbian means before Columbus arrives. We'll talk about Columbus and his legacy and so on here in a few days or next week. But this is what we have going on with Native American people in North America and then especially Central and South America at this period of time. If you look at your first EQ, it has to do with the geography of the Americas, or what role geography played in the development of different native societies. And the answer to that is really quite simple. It's the I in epics or spritey, if you had Miss Stu. The I is for interaction with the environment. And so all of these native peoples, as they started to populate North, Central, and South America, basically kind of arranged themselves to the geography that they found. And so, you think about the Native Americans of the Great Plains. You might think of them on horseback hunting buffalo or bison. Well, that's actually a fairly recent thing that happened for a fairly short period of time. But you can tell that hunting the bison and making their clothing out of the bison, making their teepees out of the bison, and eating the bison and so on, shows you that they were adapting to that animal that they found or to the geography. Or if you look at the western part of North America, and there's a number of Native Americans who live along the coast, the Pacific coast near the ocean, obviously they're going to be fishing, they're going to be getting different kinds of crustaceans and clams and things like that. They might even be whaling or hunting seals. A lot of what they're going to be doing is ocean-based. Or if you think about where I'm from, I grew up in the desert in Arizona and New Mexico. The Native Americans there, had to deal with the lack of water, for example. And so some of the natives in Arizona actually created a system of canals that ran from rivers like what becomes the Colorado River into the Phoenix area, and were bringing in water for irrigation. We've kind of seen a lot of irrigation in the old world, and so that was going on. And then we think about the Midwest and the Southeast parts of North America, and there were quite a number of tribes or civilizations that were living on rivers and using those rivers like the Mississippi River to trade on, going up and down the Mississippi and trading with other people, or going across land and trading with people. Trading amongst each other is a very popular thing to do because some people had products that others didn't. Also, we have in places like Ohio and Illinois, tribes worth mentioning that were so-called mound builders. Their legacy is, you can still see this today, there's these parks that you can go to and you can see these kinds of giant earthenworks that they made, and oftentimes they created images of animals, huge images of animals, like a mile long, and it's kind of odd because you can't see it so much from the ground. You can see it when you've got a drone, or you can see it when you're flying over it. You can you make out an animal there that they've created? And can somebody mic up and tell me what that animal is? It's a snake, yeah. So they're creating this gigantic snake for their religious purposes, their ceremonial purposes, and these things are still still there with the archaeological record. But there isn't very much else. There aren't giant stone structures that we can look at for knowing anything about them. But that's kind of cool. And then in the Northeast, where there's the forest, people are living off of the forest, of course, hunting deer and turkey and things like that, trading with each other and so on. In the Northeast, specifically on the northeast coast of the United States, there was a group of tribes that came together. I think there were 5 tribes in total, called the Iroquois League. But for the most part, all these different tribes are separate and just dealing with their local geography and being affected by it and affecting it in certain ways. So that's kind of different from what we see in Central and South America, where we do have these giant empires, and then we also have stone structures that they left behind. So hopefully you got number 1, and we're going to move on to number 2 and talk about the Mayan people. The Mayan people are people who settled in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, and the Mayan culture, the civilization, exists from about the year 200 to 900. And what they had were city-states. We've seen city-states before. In fact, I want to link city-states and this structure that you see there. This is a kind of temple. But we saw structures like this in another place that had city-states from the very beginning of this class. Do you remember what that civilization was called? And what these structures there were called? Perfect. And the pyramid-like structure? Does anyone remember the specialized word that we used for that? Perfect. Yeah, ziggurats. Yeah. So you've got these ziggurats there, and you've got these ziggurats here. Very similar function. They are temples basically, and supporting the religious beliefs of the Mayan people. It's really kind of cool. They have a polytheistic religion like the Mesopotamians did. They also have palaces and artwork and so on. This is a real honest to goodness civilization. They have their own unique, I think, agricultural products. Once again, dealing with the geography of Central and South America, it's crazy how much of the things that you and I think are maybe native to the Americas are actually old world products. All of the farm animals, for example, that you can think of, other than the turkey, are old world. They come from Asia or Africa or Europe. They do not come from the Americas. Before Columbus, none of those animals existed, on the Americas. And so the kind of things that they're growing, things that don't actually exist. In the old world are things like maize, or you and I probably call that corn, and beans and squash. There's a whole bunch of things that we'll talk about with this exchange of old world with new world. But they're growing those kinds of things. It's supporting their urban life. There's a bunch of trade going on. They have their own religious beliefs. The religious beliefs are kind of similar to the Mesopotamians in the sense that the people are bringing food offerings to the temple, but there's something that's kind of different, something that's kind of unusual both with the Mayan religion and then even bigger with the Aztec or Nahuatl religion, which has to do with this kind of obsession with blood and shedding of blood. People stick themselves or prick themselves to let their own blood flow in a way to sacrifice for the gods, so that the sun rises, or so that agriculture production continues, and even a little bit with the Mayans, a little bit of sacrificing human beings, cutting people open, killing people in order to, please the gods, make the gods happy. So that was going on even with the Mayan. The Mayan are very skilled, or were very skilled in math and astronomy. They had a solar calendar. They had a ritual calendar that lasted several hundred years. In fact, I don't know if you guys remember, but the Mayan calendar, I think, ran out in 2016. It was the end of the calendar, and a lot of people said that the Mayans were predicting that the end of the world would happen in 2016, and a few people were waiting for that. It was like all other calendars. It just started over again, and so it didn't end in 2016. Always fun, though, to hear people talk about the end of the world coming. They also came up with the concept of zero, kind of like, I think that was the Guptan people who came up with the concept of zero in the old world. They even had a writing system. People in the old world that we looked at had writing systems as well, and these guys are keeping their history, record-keeping history with their writing system. Not really sure what happens to the Mayans. These great stone structures still exist, but they just seem to have walked away from their cities, left their cities. And so probably due to the environment. Could have been invaders, but probably were not able to create enough food for the number of people that they had. They became overpopulated. People left. Perhaps maybe there was a famine. There just wasn't enough food. People died. Maybe there was some sort of disease. Not really sure, but we know that they just sort of wander off. They don't disappear. The people don't disappear. They just sort of wander off into the jungle and stay there as a non-city state, or just people living in the locality, ready to be taken over by the next group of people that we'll talk about. The Aztecs, or the Nahuatl. They originally came from the northern part of Mexico. They wandered down to central Mexico, where Mexico City is today, and they establish a a capital city at a place called Tenochtitlan. Like I said, it's basically Mexico City today. And they create an empire. An empire is when you have one person, an emperor, in charge of a whole bunch of territories that he's taken over. And so this emperor or these emperors of the Aztecs take over all of these kinds of territories. They force a number of different tribes and different peoples to be friends with them or allies with them, and they have, a fairly large and impressive state. They're very good at conquering others. They're very warlike, I guess you could say, and successful. This capital city of Tenochtitlan is very impressive. It has all those pyramids or those ziggurat-like structures that you see with the Mayans, and they also have this really fascinating way of doing agriculture. There is a lake at the center of Tenochtitlan, and they build kind of like garden beds floating on the lake so that these crops are always getting water. It's a really wonderful way of doing agriculture. They're growing the beans and the squash and corn and things like that on these. It's very, very successful. They had roads and canals and so on. It is a world-class city, really, Tenochtitlan. Palaces, temples, pyramids, and all that kind of stuff. And like I said, the Aztecs are really into their religion. It's a polytheistic religion. We've seen that kind of thing before, demanding offerings of various kinds. They have sacred music that is played or that they create. But really, the thing that we like to kind of obsess about, and historians like to obsess about, and the Spaniards obsessed about, was the amount of human sacrifice that the Aztecs were doing. Their whole society seems to be based a lot on human sacrifice, demanding from all these people that they had taken over that they send people as a kind of people tax to have their hearts cut out, so that the sun continues to rise and so that their civilization continues to be successful. We're talking about really thousands and thousands of people who are sacrificed in this way, based on daily sacrifice, but also a very complex ritual calendar. Well, over time, the Aztecs are going to decline. People got tired of sending their young people to be sacrificed in this way to the Aztecs. And then also, when the Spaniards show up, they hear about the fabulous riches of Tenochtitlan and the Aztecs, and they march with a bunch of native allies to Tenochtitlan. And then you'll see the rest of that story later. Any questions about, let's say, number 3? Number 4 on your EQs is really you kind of looking at the other sorts of religions that we've had, and then sort of comparing and contrasting them in a very simple way with what I just told you about the Aztecs. Moving on to our last slide, and the last place that we're going to be talking about today are the Inca. And this is the Incan Empire. Move from Central America, go down to South America, and along the coast of the Pacific, from basically Peru through Chile, is where we have the Incan Empire. They're able to create an empire. Once again, they're taking over other people, but they are not doing it in the same way that the Aztecs were. It seems like the Aztecs were, conquering and maybe not so nice. The Incan are one of these people who are nice to the people that they conquered, allowing them to keep their customs, allowing the people who are in charge to remain in charge as long as they give their loyalty to the Incan government or the Incan emperor. Kind of like the Ottoman Empire did, or Cyrus of the Persians and so on. They control the provinces that they take over, these territories they take over. They build cities there. They demand not human sacrifice from the people they had taken over, but they demand labor from them, called the mita. They ask that, or they don't ask, they demand that the local people build cities, for example, or they build this wonderful system of roads that the Inca had. The system of roads was able to keep this really long and narrow empire together. There's also a very interesting way that the Inca were keeping records or sending news along this very long road system. It's called the quipu, which is a system of knots in ropes that allows them to send messages and to keep records. It's really unusual when we think about the clay tablets or the stone tablets or the papyrus and things like that the Egyptians were writing on. Just a different language, different written language, so to speak, or a different way of keeping records. The Inca too have a little tiny bit of human sacrifice. Most of their offerings, though, most of their sacrifices to their polytheistic gods are foods and maybe like llamas, things like that. Usually not so much the bloody rituals of the Aztecs. Once again, a way of keeping the empire maybe a little bit happier than demanding that people die for their religion. Sadly, though, there is uh, the end to the Incan Empire is somewhat similar to the Aztec Empire. Spaniards show up, and then the Spaniards are able to, with very few people, topple this civilization of millions of people. It's the story you'll see tomorrow when you watch the beginning of a video on that, and then answer some questions. That'll be Tuesday and Thursday, actually, when you look at the conquering of the Inca by the Spaniards. I guess one last thing, just to sort of reinforce, is that the system of roads, we've seen roads before in other places too, is really what keeps the Incan Empire together. And the emperor, if he wants to send a message, sends runners along these roads. There's also these sort of rope bridges that go from one part of a mountain, let's say, to the next, or span chasms. And it's really pretty amazing what they're able to create in this system of roads. Okay, I am done giving you the information that you need. Hopefully you got all 5 of the EQs. Is there anything that anybody is confused on or needs further clarification on?